welcome to my channel. Welcome back if you've already been here before. I'm Kayla Jury, and I am a newbie author writing my memoir turned young adult dystopian fantasy. And as I've been writing my memoir, and even my whole life as I dreamed to write a book about my life and to write my own memoir, one of the things that I know and that I have found is that it comes with a lot of emotional weight. The stories that I'm writing, while yes, I'm adapting it to be fiction and altering the timeline, are stories and things of my life. The people that are in this, the characters are people in my life or things that were represented in my life. And it can create, and it has already created a lot of emotion as I've been writing. There have been days where I've cried. There have been days where I've cried sad tears, where I've had so much compassion and thought about little Kayla and past Kayla. And there's also been times where I've cried tears of so much gratitude of where I am now, realizing my story. And in preparing to even write my memoir, there were so many, demons, thoughts, parts of my life that I really had to deal with. And so one of the things that I've decided to do is to provide deeper insight for myself as I write and for you as you're following along in my writing journey by bringing experts in to talk about these things to talk about the feelings of growing up in an unstable childhood with an abusive father, an alcoholic mother, and then siblings, the whole gamut of how we have all grown up and changed or proceeded in our life based on those things, and growing up in poverty and having times being homeless. All of that has created so much, a web of things. And so I wanted to start a series where I dove into how are those things growing up in that unstable childhood, how did they build who I am today? How did I get out? How did my life change? And in doing so, not only does that help me understand myself better, but it also helps me understand my story better, and for you to understand my story better as well. This very first one, I've brought in a relationship expert. Her name is Lena Athena, and she's so incredibly wise beyond her years. And I believe I'm going to have her back on, but we dive into the mother-daughter relationship and what that is like. That's one of the things that is her specialty. And mine, of course, has been very undescribable. I don't have a word for it. We've been distant. There's been regret. There's been bitterness. There's been compassion. Right now, we're in a place where we talk about monthly, which feels really good just via text. I wanted to look into that relationship and see how it grows, why it's important, how it changes, not only for me and other people who've grown up in unstable childhoods, but for anybody who's having tough feelings in their mother-daughter relationship. So settle back, grab some water, be ready to take some notes, and dive into the mother-daughter relationship. Welcome back to the channel. Y'all, I am so excited and low-key, high-key nervous for today because as I've been working on my memoir, y'all know that relationships play a huge role in it. So I have brought on my friend Lena, who is a relationship expert. And she has blown my mind away with even just like the tidbits she has said in conversations that we've had together. We've low-key kind of like had coaching calls where we've coached each other, and in the mastermind that we are in. And so I feel like in the process of writing this book, there's nothing better than, while I'm already knees deep, elbows deep, eyeballs deep in my emotions and my childhood, to have someone to talk about it with me and with all of you. So Lena, welcome. Why don't you give everybody just kind of like a spiel about who you are, what your background is, why it is that you know what you know.
Okay, I love it. And thanks for having me here. I'm so excited for this. It's going to be so much fun. So my name's Lena Athena, and I focus on complex relationships. Obviously, to be somebody who focuses on that, you have to have had a few. I won't dig into that today because today's about you. But I studied psychology. I originally planned to be a middle school counselor. That was my whole life plan. Things shifted around, and eventually I ended up in the coaching space. But I always go back to studying behavioral psychology, human learning. What are the patterns and habits that we pick up? Why do we keep them even though they're not working? How do we better communicate what patterns aren't working without assuming people can mind read? And so these are some of the things that I love to dig into. And so I hope we get to dig into some of that today.
I think we are. I was thinking, I was like, I should have brought like a box of tissues or something. So I think I'll make it out without crying because I do feel like I've gotten to a really good place. And if I do cry, I think it'll be a different style of cry. So probably be like very good feeling. So I have a feeling that you and I are going to be doing a couple of these. Like, particularly, I have 4 of these interviews in mind. So if you guys love this one, you'll have to subscribe and stay because I want to have Lena on for more. Because in writing my memoir, my story, yes, it's my story and it's my perspective, but there's so many other characters that create the actions that I take, that create the perspective that I have and that I'm interacting. And the main characters in my life, even though I'm 1 out of 6 kids, are mostly my mom, my dad, and then my closest sister to me and my closest brother to me because we're closest in age. My older siblings, like my oldest brother is like 20 years older than me, so they don't play, or 16 years older than me, they don't play like a large role in a lot of my life until I was older also, like high school, college years. The thing as I was thinking about having you on is I didn't want to just talk about relationships as a whole, because when I think about my relationship with my mom, it is nothing like my relationship with my dad. And my relationship with my sister, nowhere similar. The feelings that I have towards them, like even in thinking about this, like I want to eventually talk about the relationship with my brother with you, and that's the one that I know is going to rip my heart apart. Like, but there's so, just for different reasons. And so today I really want to talk about, because I'm writing my memoir and I've turned it, it's not going to be nonfiction. Well, no, memoir's nonfiction, but it is a dystopian fantasy young adult book series. And so right now it's planned to be a duology. And in this first book, the people who are largely in my life are my mom and my sister. I thought that we could start with my mom. Obviously, the mom and daughter relationship is so important. And so for me growing up feeling like I never ever had that, like only just this Mother's Day I was reflecting on how I have the ability to be okay with that, and I have the ability to look at other moms and daughters celebrating and not be like mad that I'm not going to brunch or getting a pedicure or anything like that. But it's obviously like a bond that's really important. So maybe just to start, tell us about that. Just like the general mom and daughter relationship. Why is it special? Why does it even matter for us growing up from childhood to, well, I'm in my late 30s. So now.
Absolutely. So, I mean, I love mother-daughter relationships. A lot of my clients come in and it's so complicated in nature because there's this added element where moms do tend to project who they are versus who they want to be onto their daughters. They see that reflection of themselves. Sometimes their daughter looks really similar. And so any sort of, bodily dislikes or self-esteem issues, or they have similar personalities, those might get projected. And the dislike of self can kind of go onto the dislike of the other, of I need to fix my daughter, I need to help her, I don't want her to have the same insecurities, the same doubts, the same challenges, the same relationships. And so it's, for the most part, from a loving space that moms will tend to notice what they feel is a concern because they felt it was a concern in their own life, either in the past or they still do. And then they try to remedy that in advance. And as a child, that feels predominantly like criticism, a lack of reassurance, validation that is not being given that you absolutely do need. And if we zoom out from a human behavior perspective and we look at how do we survive as a species, we're highly reliant, right? We are one of the few species that are born so incompetent, so vulnerable at birth. And so we have this inherent structure to our brain and our analysis of the world as we grow up that is highly emotionally dependent and in nature codependent in our childhood. And that actually serves us because you obviously want the people who need to make sure you survive to like you as a child, but most of us keep that. And so then that is one of the biggest obstacles in the shift from a child mother-daughter relationship to the adult mother-daughter relationship, is then to understand, oh, at what point do I stop seeking certain validations? And we all mess that up because I think as teenagers, we don't have the best brains either. Like
Yeah, no.
yes, there's such a hormonal mess, and we're still figuring out our executive function and how to make decisions and who are we really. And so a lot of the time there's that desire for separation that starts, and there's like the shunning of the parent because they're not good enough, and you realize they were never perfect, and how could you have bought the story that they were perfect. And in that transition, we tend to do a pendulum swing and kind of go to the other side and take it to an extreme. And then we go into our early adulthood and we swing a little bit back over. And then we go, wait, am I going to keep swinging back and forth? Am I going to find a healthy middle? How do I make sure that my parents can still be a support and a guidance and people that I look to for certain wisdom, but not people that I assume have wisdoms that they really don't, and I need to see this accurately? And how do I stop projecting my parents onto myself? Because that has happened my entire life. I could ramble about this for hours, but to me, that is the summary of why mother-daughter relationships specifically are so complicated. I think especially because we as women, and we can get into like the biology, the physiology, and the sociology of it, but we as women do feel also very vulnerable in comparison to men in society. And so I think the heightened safety element makes mothers more critical and protective and more likely to project even harder, maybe, than some father-son relationships, which I don't know. I might be biased because I'm a daughter, so we'll have to see. But yeah, that's my little, container. What stood out to you?
I'm like, my mind is already blown because the part that I'm writing, and I'm writing in the books, so the part that my mind is like really into, but I keep reflecting to my younger years are those teen years. So when you started talking about that, and very specifically like shunning your parents when you're starting to disagree with their ideas, one, I just feel so seen by you really going over this timeline of large changes that happen in our brain in reaction to our parents. And I was like, oh, so all of those are standard. Just, I feel good. Generally, I feel good now that that makes me feel less alone. But the part that I'm writing is kind of where she does transition into that development of almost like resentment for her mom's decisions. And I was moving out of, and the book starts with me, and as I'm even reflecting on it now, I'm like, ooh, I could show this a little bit deeper and better and more clear in my writing, but another conversation for another time. But I think when I was a child, my mom just wasn't around because we lived in poverty. My mom worked 2 or 3 jobs. And when my mom wasn't working, she was drinking. So she was also an alcoholic. And so then, of course, there was many different reasons why money left and different things like that. But as a kid, kind of what you were talking about was seeking that validation. I was always seeking validation because I was also always alone. So I was also trying to just get general attention from my mom. And I think that's one of the things that made me excel at school and become very good at school, because it was the way that I could get someone's attention. And so I even write into my book about how my mom has never come to like a conference, a school conference or a parent teacher conference or anything like that. And even when I was little, like in 4th grade, I felt so terrible about that. I just wanted her to like do the normal parent things so badly. And I'm like, just like show up and ask my teacher how I am. And my mom never cared about grades at all. And I think it's out of her 6 kids, I did very well. And so she was always like, I'm not worried about you. And I was like, wait, be worried about me. And I remember when she told me C's get degrees, and I was like, no, I'm kicking ass to get fucking A's all the time so you can look at me. But so it was really interesting that I had that desire for validation, I think for a really long time though. And for me, that shunning of her came more in my later years when high school started to come to an end. And I think I became a little bit more independent, which maybe could be in a lot of different ways. I felt like a late bloomer. So maybe along with this, I kind of transitioned to that late because I was wanting her attention for so long. But then I just became angry because as I got older and I realized the poverty we were living in, and I realized my mom's decisions were making us stay there, I was angry. And I was probably angry from sophomore, junior year of high school all the way until I was like 31. Like, super angry about it. And I just remember I would see other kids that were like good at sports, and I'd be so mad at my mom that she like could not afford to put me into sports. And so I would see like when I started bodybuilding when I was 28, I was like, damn, if I'd been doing sports since I was 5, bodybuilding would be so fucking easy. I'd be so jacked right now. I'd already have a muscle base. I didn't start running till I was in college, and I was like, dang, if I would have done sports when I was younger, I'd be such a faster runner. And so I held on to that for a really long time. And so I feel like I swung to that other side so hard. But then I studied abroad, and I studied my degree. My background is human development and family science. I did education background. And I studied families in poverty. And so there was a time where then the pendulum swung the other way where I was like, oh, none of this is my mom's fault. Like, at all. But then I like almost gave too much love. And then I remember coming home and I brought her these gifts and I was like trying to love on her. I was like, oh, wait, no, we still don't have a relationship in which you know how to pay attention to me. And then went right back to the other side. So when you're talking about like that back and forth and later in life, I've totally, totally experienced that. I also want to talk about, you said projecting parents onto myself, and I'm sure there's some of me in there right now. So I'm going to pause there because I feel like I just said a lot. When you hear all of that, are those things you've heard before? What is your response? What bubbles up in your brain hearing just the things I've only shared just now?
Absolutely. A lot of it sounds very familiar. I think, as humans, we are both like wildly different from each other, but we follow very similar templates because we have similar structures to our brain. One of the things that stood out, which is not always the case, but what I heard you say is that it took you a little bit longer to start that kind of rejection process. And that does tend to happen in more high performing kids that actually do better. I think because maybe you had a system that validated you or something external outside the home. And so you were like, oh, I don't need to blame them too much yet. Whereas it's often the child who's like the obvious black sheep of the family. They tend to go through that first because they're like, well, nothing's really serving me. I'm not getting validation anywhere because I'm like that weirdo, the misfit, the one being bullied or the one with the bad grades or whatever it is. So I just thought that's something interesting that maybe the people listening to might care to pick up on.
Yeah, that is really interesting also because I have always called myself the black sheep of the family, but because I'm just different from everyone else. Because I'm the only one who hasn't had like drug issues, substance abuse issues. I'm pretty sure I'm the only one who hasn't been arrested, like things like that. And so I'm also the only one of my mom's kids who hasn't moved back in with her after leaving. And so I've always stood out. And I remember there was even times, and like I said, I'm going to be like, when we talked about previously, super raw to this. I remember coming home and finding like a pipe in my mom's bedroom and being like, what is this? And being told that my mom and all my other siblings would get high together, but they didn't want to tell me about it.
Wow. And how did that feel?
Well, horrible, because I felt so like alone and unaccepted. And I think it wasn't until all of that stuff started becoming more clear that I quit trying to get that validation from my mom at all. Because at that point I was like, I used drugs and I quit after 7th grade. So once I decided to quit, I think, and then I went into high school and I joined dance team because it was the only sport where I could earn money to pay for it myself. They had like a program where you could earn money for it. And I think that is kind of what led me to being like, when I was on dance team, I was like, I can't drink, I can't do drugs anymore. Like, that's why I quit, because I heard dance team was something I could try out for.
That's awesome.
So I think that difference started to pull me away, and maybe I started seeing, or not maybe, but I started seeing other examples of like parents who were doing other things. So in that way, like you said, I was the black sheep because I was very different, but I still got that acknowledgement outside because I really excelled in dance too. And my dance coaches like really took me under their wing. One of my dance coaches, when I graduated high school, if I would have gone on and pursued dance, she was going to give me a monthly stipend so I didn't have to like have a job, so I could focus on dance. So yeah. I got that acknowledgement other places, just not from my family. Yeah. So that's really interesting.
It is really interesting. And that's why one of the main things I tell people, we need to work on this in the beginning, is that self-validation skill, because the more you validate yourself, generally the less resentment you build against other people. Now, I want to clarify, not building resentment is not the same as not listening to your genuine anger because your anger is telling you something has to change, or not listening to your sadness telling you that something has to change. But resentment is a very specific type of feeling, that you touched on, which is they could have done better by me. Like, why didn't they? It's this kind of like emotional tug of war we do with the other person that they're not even aware of most of the time, Absolutely. Which is very exhausting. So if you have that self-validation component, that is ideal. If you don't, and you get the validation from like the school system or from friends, then it still makes it easier to not get into the dwelling of the resentment and be a little bit more proactive in how you process relationships.
Okay, that was really powerful, because I think in what you just said, I can look and see like 4 separate parts of my journey in general. One was self-validation, because I would get it externally, but I did have to teach myself to validate myself. And I think that's something I still work on. I literally got coached on it like 2 weeks ago. So I can see where that comes from, right? In this conversation. But the other thing too is I think getting over my resentment, but also what you just said, I think was so astute, like separating resentment and anger and sadness. Because I think one of the big things that I did to protect myself, and I don't know how much you see this, is I just didn't feel anything. And when I did start feeling anything, or whenever anger would come up, or whenever sadness would come up, I would stop them, block them, maybe allow a resentment in if I allowed anything at all. Like at first there was no feelings. Like if I felt sad, my mom didn't come to school to talk to my teachers, it completely ignored it, right, immediately. So then the only feeling I started allowing in was resentment, and not until like probably 30 or something, and I still work on this now, did I allow in feelings of sadness and anger. And so I feel like that self-validation, that allowing of feelings, that allowing of anger and resentment, like, tell me a little bit about that. Like, how do you pull them apart? How do you even become aware? Like, what are signs, or what are steps, or like, because to me, that was really complicated and hard work. Like, I think feelings, I joke all the time. I'm like, oh, I'm just a human with feelings now. I hate it. When I was a robot, life was so easy. But so, I don't know. Tell me a little bit about that.
So I want to say something first that hopefully makes this easier for anybody and everybody, but does not absolve us of our accountability and responsibility, which is to say that society has generally taught most of us either not to draw boundaries, or to draw boundaries when we feel resentful. And so because of that, many of us wait for the resentment, and it's actually empowering in that sense to go to resentment instead of anger and sadness, right? Sadness is a very vulnerable emotion to share, especially if you don't have the resentment to accompany it that says this is totally the other person's fault. Somebody has the power to change this. Without that, sadness can feel very powerless. And then with anger, a lot of us are afraid of our own aggression and the aggressiveness that comes up as we're processing and things are overwhelming, and we care so much to be kind, or, to be present. So because of that emotional overwhelm, when you pair or replace sadness and anger and other feelings that are important as well in relationships with resentment, most of us feel more powerful, because we're like, I know the problem, I know whose fault it is, and my job is just to make sure that they fix it, which is a very righteous place to be in emotionally. And so, and it's addictive. And so I wanted to start by saying, yes, society kind of inadvertently sets us up for that, which is why I like to talk about how boundaries are kind. Boundaries actually build intimacy. Boundaries is you allowing somebody in. It's being vulnerable, because most of us are, for lack of a better term, doing it wrong and just doing it how we're told instead of how it serves us.
All super reactionary too. Like you said, like my mind went, oh, when you said we wait until we have resentment to build a boundary. And then that just makes me think about all the ways we spiral in creating the boundary, probably because we're not in neutral, creating the incorrect boundary. And then if anybody even tries to encroach on the boundary, we get so upset about it and we don't uphold it. We don't uphold it correctly or fairly in the way that makes sense. So I was just like, oh, that makes so much sense, because you are not, it's all reactive. It never really occurred to me. I mean, now in my life, the way I move, yes, but I hadn't really thought about this of like, creating those thoughts ahead of time, of preparing myself, and of course. So one of the things also that you said, and I know you're going to describe the boundary thing, but it really hit me the way you said righteous, because I was for a while. I was so, and this part, I can feel the pressure behind my eyes. I can feel the wetness, but I think that's one of the things that I had to grapple with a lot, because when I did decide to quit being like my family and doing drugs and doing things that were quote unquote bad or labeled a certain way, there was a time where the only way I felt like I could get through was to feel better than. And that's not good for anybody. And it wasn't good for me. And I didn't even realize I was doing it, but the realization of doing it felt bad. The awareness, it was like, there was like just like guilt and shame for that feeling.
Yeah, I say this with a lot of love, but it's like the righteousness is so addictive, because most of us, we don't grow up with the resources and tools to figure out how do I sit with my own feelings, express them in a way that's kind. Like I always like to preach kind boundaries, and I built my whole methodology around you actually are meant to feel like you're doing the other person a really nice favor by sharing how you feel, and you're being vulnerable and you're processing and you have good intentions, and if you're not in that state of mind, there's a lot of work you can do to get there, but most of us don't see the role modeling for that. And so because we see the role modeling that, well, only set a boundary, which is an uncomfortable thing you do to the other person that disappoints them, and that's the assumption, then you only do that if you feel righteous and you're certain it's the right thing to do. And so we have to get to that state. And a lot of the feeling better than desire is because for a long time we don't feel like our life is getting better. And that's why we get resentful. And so we're like, well, at least it's better than this person. This is very like natural, better than something concept that our brain is looking for, right? So if it's not that I have grown and I can point to how I've grown and I'm better than the person that I was and I now know how to communicate this better, which is like a more ideal and fruitful place from which to communicate boundaries of like, okay, I didn't have the self-awareness. I acknowledged myself first. I'm with the feelings. I sat with the vulnerability. I really do have the intention to trust this person and work as a team. If we don't do all that work, because we're never taught how, and we are maybe too overwhelmed to do it at this time, we don't have the right support, the resources, then we just go to the righteousness. 'Cause that's fun, and it's not, I wouldn't call it like a genuine fun, but it's a lot more fun than the despair.
Well, and I think that's why it was so hard to like come down off of it in a way. And it felt so bad because it felt very safe and very strong. And then when I came down off of it, then the thing I had to deal with, I like your word despair. And the thing that I had to deal with was like, oh, wait, I'm not actually better than my family. We are actually the same. We just all made different choices. And then I had to go back and be like, fuck, I'm the same. And I was like, that sucks. I don't want to be that. And then I'm like, okay. And I've learned, I've grown, and really kind of what I learned is like, just deal with yourself and think about, like, it started to become a very internal job versus a very external job, I think.
Absolutely. And you probably see my face always lights up when you're like, I was righteous. Or, you like the self-awareness moments are the juicy moments. Those are the moments you actually have the most power. And we don't always feel that way because the resentment and the righteousness feels very powerful in comparison. But that's when you have the power because you actually go, oh, this is a predominantly inward experience. And this is a journey in which I, as a person, grow and figure out how to better support and advocate for myself and how to sit with my feelings and give myself the validation that I want and the love that I deserve and to be less reliant on others. And we are a tribal species. So in the beginning, that feels incredibly lonely. And it's certainly not, and I cannot stress this enough, not the full equation. So that's never meant to be like, oh, well, if you just validate yourself and love yourself, you'll be fine. You won't care. Like, no, you are a tribal being. You do need to get to that point, but we need a balance of the two. And so if we don't do the first, and we, unfortunately, most of us did not get role modeling for the first, even if we're like self-aware people and we're active and we're listening to podcasts, it takes time, it takes practice. You have to integrate it. You can work with a coach or someone to mirror it back to you, and that can generally help. But at the end of the day, it's a process. And so sometimes processes and like not getting the immediate dopamine hit or the achievement, again, just doesn't feel as sexy as going, oh, I'm just going to decide that I'm right and other people are wrong.
Yeah. I feel like that hit me so much how you said that that's actually when you're powerful. When you're not feeling it, when you are sitting in that despair and like your heart is, you feel like your body is melting, and maybe if you're like me, you really do flop onto the floor and you're like, what is happening in my life? I think that is a really powerful thought and really helpful for me, and I think for anybody else going through this, like if I were watching this 10 years ago, I would want somebody to like make that very clear. Like those moments where you're actually feeling are very important. Don't feel like you're not supposed to be feeling. It's not a problem. You are actually doing the most powerful work right then. because I was always like, end this feeling the fastest as possible. Like, get out of this as fast as possible. This is horrible. This feels bad to like care or not care or whatever this is. So I think that's really, really interesting. But also what you said, I have kind of two questions and I don't want to forget them. I've been taking so many notes already. But you were talking about being a tribal being. And one of the things, when I think about my childhood, I feel like that's been one of the hardest things for me is I feel like I've done a lot of internal work eventually, but one of the hardest things for me to do is still establish my tribe. And it's like, what do you know? What do you see? What advice do you have? Because I kept trying to go back to my family and trying to go back where, and I, again, like I, I don't know really how to say this, but like, I think that I don't even necessarily like the word healing, but like I've done a lot of inner work. There's a lot of other people in my family who have not even begun it yet. And so it's like those things on different timelines don't, like, even if I feel better and I go back into that environment where nothing has changed and it's like it's not feeding me and helpful to me for what I desire, right? And so it's like I would try to go back and try to go back, and then I held on to this hope, and this hope was so toxic because I held on to this hope every time and view this whole time that things would be different, or that I'd someday have a relationship with my mom, or that someday we would do brunch or get our nails done and she would care. And like, she has started texting me every year on my birthday for probably the last 5 years. So, and we probably text almost once a month now, which is big. But yeah, so I don't know. Tell me about like finding the tribe when you're in a relationship like this, or how much dedication do you see people have to keeping that relationship or letting go of it and then finding their tribe somewhere else? Because that's been a huge part of my journey.
I mean, there's some good news and some bad news, right? I'm going to start with the bad news, which is that if you don't have the internal trust that you are safe feeling like a tribe with all the people that are a part of your tribe, there's a lack of trust. And so that anxiety and frustration and wondering and doubt and overanalysis and hypervigilance for many can enter other relationships where you totally do feel equipped and you otherwise would have a feeling of feeling really deeply connected, because that trust gap in the back of your head of like, oh, but I thought that everything was really good with my family, and it took me, till my teen years. That's many years. That's more than a decade to figure that out. And so I think many of us hold on to like just that little thought in the back of the head that's like, what if in 10 years I figure out I didn't understand this person either, or like this is more, and so it's a difficult, challenging thought to be with. We don't have to trust the thought, but I think just naming it and acknowledging it. And some people don't have that, and that's cool.
No,
But
I absolutely have that.
yeah.
I
Yeah.
absolutely do. And I think that's even something like in my marriage that we talk about, where I will, even in things that seem to be unrelated, like I'd be like, why am I upset about this? Like, why would I be upset if you're going to go like out to a concert that I'm not at? Like, because I'm not actually worried about like other women, but there is that underlying, I think, abandonment and just loneliness because I was always alone. So it's like, I don't even trust he's going to like come back, or that's going to mean if he's gone without me, it means he doesn't even want to be around me, or he doesn't care about me. Like there's like this whole thing that we've done so much work on and I feel really great about, but that trust and that's why I think this is so amazing as I'm writing my book and as we're having this conversation, is this shit happened to me when I was little, and I didn't even start working on it until I was 26. I went to therapy and the therapist told me that I had a traumatic childhood, and I went, what? And she was like, yeah. And I just didn't know. And so there was not even any, and it's like, how different, and I don't regret this, but I just say this out of like curiosity and wow, how different would life have been if this stuff was common knowledge?
It's interesting. This doesn't quite answer the question, and it's actually weird that I'm going to share that because I'm a very private person, but I'll give you the context. My husband says to me, even to this day, I think similarly to your husband, and my husband does a good job of calling me out on the times when maybe I'm more hypervigilant than I need to be. And I started working on this stuff very young, like very, very young. I became very self-aware, I think too young for my own comfort. I had no idea how to express it, what to do with it. And I was seeking, that's why I wanted to be a middle school counselor. I thought my middle school counselor was the coolest person because I was like, I think there's a person I can start talking about this stuff with. Like, whoa. And so, but having even started that young to this day, the person that I trust most in the whole world looks at me and goes, I've never seen you need to utilize the level of distrust you seem to have in people. Which is such a useful mirroring back because I'm like, that's true. Like I said, I'm a very private person. I don't really need to be. In fact, it doesn't serve me a lot of the time. But having that self-awareness and going, you know what? But that's still my comfort zone. And not only is it my comfort zone, it's not there just for comfort because it makes me feel good, like like scrolling on your phone. It's there for comfort because it makes my choices and my internal dialogue sustainable. And so the reason I'm sharing that is I think that sometimes when we are very self-aware, we think, well, then I'll fix it and I'll solve it and I'll fix me. And it's like, no, maybe I'll just learn what is unique and different about what I need to do to take care of myself in the reality that I'm choosing to interpret. And none of us interpret reality with 100% accuracy, no matter what. And so, I don't think that you knowing how healed you are has to do with, I now trust everything all the time. Although that is I'm also writing a book and that's a big part of the focus is I want you to trust the world around you and the people and the relationships. And it's okay to realize, well, there's a certain dynamic I have with reality that allows me to feel that it's sustainable. And so that in the harder moments, it doesn't hit as hard and I have my balance and that doesn't make you unhealed. That makes you self-loving and supportive and in progress.
And I think that was a misconception that I had. I thought like, oh, I'm going to talk about this, I'm going to fix it, and it's going to be over and gone. And it's not. You can't like literally lobotomize your past and your things and your events. They still all exist. It just becomes an awareness of what are my tools? How do I do with it in my, like you said, in the reality, in my perception of everything that's happening right now. And it just is that over and over and over again. And once you have the experience, the awareness, then you're like, I know the next time I want to melt on the floor, I know the next time I'm feeling not trust for John leaving somewhere, that I can actually just tap into like, oh, wait, what is this really? Okay, that's not really what this is. This is your perception. So what is the actual thing happening? What does it really mean when he says da 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 da? It doesn't mean he's leaving you forever and abandoning you or not caring back, right? So all of those different things, I think that's really powerful. One of the things that I wonder is we've talked so much about role modeling, and every time we say that, I of course imagine like people who grew up like me had no role model, like zero, besides teachers. And not all of this like more intimate stuff is role modeled in that way. Do you work with a lot of moms? And is it kind of their goal to not only solve this for themselves, but role model it differently?
I work with a lot of moms specifically because the transition from just being a daughter to also being a mother creates a lot of internal tension. So all of the like residual people pleasing that most of my clients have already worked through beforehand comes up to the surface because they're like, "Oh, I now have a much more nuanced level of difference between me and other people because I have this new being to take care of and protect and I want them to have my values and I want them to be safe and I want them to have certain life experiences." And so with that comes a lot of negotiating with your husband or partner around how are we going to do things? What's most important? What is our division of labor? And there's the negotiation with other people wanting to be a part of it, but many people just want to like hold the baby and kiss the baby. And some parents are not okay with that versus actually come and help and be like, hey, do you need me to cook you a meal? Like, So that transition is a very powerful, like extremely powerful transition in terms of identity. But it's also a time where you're either dealing with like morning sickness or a crying baby or, that fight with your mom that you didn't hope would happen when you're like sleep deprived because you didn't get to sleep last night. And so that's when I noticed that a lot of just going internally and going, okay, even if I've mastered relationships, or even if I thought I did, now that there are higher stakes, if there's somebody that depends on my mental emotional state at all times, because they have the mirror neurons, they're going to mirror exactly who I am and how I'm being, they're going to project me onto themselves. The more self-aware a woman is, the more it's like, okay, now it's really go time.
Do moms sometimes then just like swing so hard the other way where they become like, I don't want to give, I want a different life for my child, but then like whatever they're creating is just like they end up going too hard and then it's not even the life they imagine they're creating?
Absolutely. That absolutely happens. And I think that, I tend to attract a very self-aware woman. And so she calls herself out on it. And usually these people also have a really supportive partner, ideally, who calls them out on it too and goes, hey, like, I don't know how to say this nicely, but are you scared you're turning into your mom? Or like, are you, what's going on? And because it is an emotionally more vulnerable state, hormones are, there's a lot going
Yeah.
on in that. Sometimes it's hard to really sit with it and let it hit, and it takes time to process. So I'm saying that because you have to also give yourself a lot of grace in that period. But it is interesting because I think most of us, no matter what, there is a part of us that is our parents, right? Because we just learned to be them. That was the learning. It was like the whole context of the world as a newborn is like, I mean, first in utero, it's like, this is inside of mom. And then you go outside, you're like, this is the outside of mom, and then there's like dad too. But it's very limited. And so we forget that. I always like to remind people like you're meant to be self-centered, like you're the center of your universe, and you tend to assume that the world in front of you is the world at large until you see otherwise. And that doesn't mean you want to keep yourself there, but I think having the grace to go, okay, I can still learn other ways of doing things. I can still challenge what was taught to me. I can still, I have a lot of clients that they're like, I need to look my mother in the eye and tell her to stop giving my toddler chocolate. And that feels like such a stupid conversation to have for the 17th time, but it's also a really big conversation because it's, am I making her feel that I'm criticizing her lifestyle and her health and her decisions?
Yeah.
Am I making her feel guilty about how she raised me because she didn't know this is how I would raise my young? And so, does she have internal dialogue around that? How much of this has to do with like norms and her just wanting to follow the social norms? How much of this has to do with, I want to feel like a fun grandma and this is about my grandma experience? So it's like everything is a lot more, maybe,
Complex.
yeah, just relationships are complicated, right? And so,
Yes. Well, and that and something you said earlier made me wonder. I had a thought because I remember my mom telling me a story when I was younger, that her mom would read her diary. And I wonder if part of what my mom did is, yes, of course, there was, again, complex, so many different layers. There was the alcoholism, there was the multiple jobs, there was probably just like pure exhaustion. I remember her looking at me and saying, I don't want to be a mom anymore. And I'm pretty sure I was like 8.5. So I think that, and she'd gone through a lot of shit. My dad was physically abusive. We moved across the country when they separated, and my little brother stayed with him. And I think there's a lot of things that she regrets, and I think she has sunk into a lot of those feelings. But I wonder if a part of her, what felt like absence to me, was her giving space she wished she had when she was younger.
yeah, and it very well could be.
It never occurred to me as a possibility, like ever, but it could be.
Yeah, a lot of the times, our parents do have some self-awareness of what didn't serve them, and they try to correct and they overcorrect in terms of not wanting to stick to religions or traditions at like a very extreme state. Like that's a big point of tension I see between my clients and their parents, where their parents are like, well, we have this tradition, and they're like, but I don't want to lie to my kid about Santa Claus,
Like
or
Santa or whatever.
and it's like,
I'm so
so
pro Santa. Come on, people. Imagination's fun. I'm writing a fantasy book.
yeah, and so everybody has a different feeling about reality based on like their very nuanced childhood too. And I think at the end of the day, it's like, are you actually serving yourself and the people you love to the best of your abilities? And if you are, it's really not your job to get any of it perfect.
Yeah. That's so powerful to think about. So one of the things that I always felt, and I'd be so curious to hear about you and like some of the things that you commonly see, or like, are there certain trends that you see, like, and I'm not sure your clientele that you've worked with, but one of the things that was really hard to me until literally probably 2 or 3 years ago was this idea that I always felt alone and I always felt different. Even, especially maybe that's because I didn't start even realizing that I knew that I was different as a kid. I felt very different as a kid because I was poor. Like money very much separated me because we couldn't buy clothes, go out, do things, buy meals out, things like that that everybody else was doing. So it was very obvious. And like when you put a poor kid next to a kid that has money, you can physically see it, right? And so I knew I was different then, but I think not until I was an adult did I realize how traumatic my life was. And I am just curious about things like that, like my mom not being around, alcoholism versus not, growing up in poverty versus not. In my mind, and this could be wrong, but in my mind, I had a bunch of shit to fix. And I feel like that's accurate, right?
The answer is always yes, because
Okay.
you're saying in my mind, right? And so the answer is always yes. In your mind, you had a bunch of shit to fix because that's not what you wanted to be your reality. Um, Now, I do, yes.
I just had a huge aha when you said that. One of the things, so moving to New York, we had a friend who loves to like go hang out in these very poor neighborhoods. And I just remember talking to John one day and I'm like, why does Pete do this? Like, cute, but why does Pete want to go hang out in these really poor neighborhoods? Like, I don't understand, because for me, I was like, I don't want that to be my reality. I've worked so hard. And I think that's one of the things that I realized when I've like been able to get over my trauma and feel like quote unquote healed is like the first time I could go to a dive bar and not just feel full of shame and angry and hot in my body and be like comfortable to be there and like accepted, because I used to try so hard to not be anywhere near a dive bar because I didn't want it to be my reality that like I couldn't. I was like, I've worked so hard to not have to choose a dive bar because there was no choice in my life because of the way we grew up. And so I was like, why would Pete want to go to these places? And what you just said of I didn't want it to be my reality, but I have this assumption that nobody wants it to be their reality. And one of the things that I learned from Pete is there are people there that regardless of finances love each other so much. But my reality was poor equaled no love,
Yes.
or poor equaled danger, poor equaled unsafe, poor equaled not being cared about. And it's like, it's so interesting that my friend is like, no, these communities to me are filled with the most love. And I was like, okay, well, I guess that was just different for me. But I just remember feeling I was triggered by him like wanting to do that. And it was so crazy for me. So you just saying it was not the reality I wanted just flipped a switch in my mind, because in my mind, it's not the reality anyone wants.
And most of us think in that absolutism,
Yeah.
right?
And I have no business saying what anyone else wants
Yeah. And I've heard from
at
a
all.
lot of clients that, I mean, there's a wide array of what environments they grew up in. And, so I hear people on this end of the spectrum being like, I just wish we had money. Then maybe my parents would have had the bandwidth, but they didn't. And they could have made better financial decisions to make sure we would have more money. And I hear people over here being like, all my parents cared about was money. And like they were absent because they had money and they just wanted to keep growing it anyway. And I hear, it's like you can land really anywhere, because at the end of the day, we always do want to feel better, right? Kind of going back to that earlier conversation. We want to progress. We're very growth oriented beings. And so the more self-aware you are and the more you want to progress, the more you look for, well, where is better? And so when you look for where is better, sometimes we think so quickly and feel so intensely that we forget that my brain is giving me a statement that's absolutely true for me, but not absolutely true for everybody. And so it just happens. But, like you said, you just catch it later.
So I have a question about that, because one of the things that I think about, and even super transparently for the audience listening to this, I was asked by my coach, she was kind of like, what is the purpose that you want to do with these interviews? Are you trying to help people like you get through something? She's like, or do you want people who are not like you to see this and understand people like you. And I thought really hard about that. And because this is one of the things that I was thinking about in my own, because one of the things that she brought up is like a lot of the things that are hard for me, like her and I couldn't have lived a different childhood. She had very loving parents. She always had whatever she needed, things like that. Like, and so, but we have some of the same like core things we have to work on just in general in life, and like that we get coached on like repeatedly. And so one of the things that we were even talking about was I like that need to get validation externally. It's like she has that, but for a completely different reason, because she was a D1 athlete and like constantly was like had to be good enough. And I was like, I just am trying to be seen because no one will look at me, you know. But she was like had to excel in order to feel looked at. So I think one of the things that was really hard for me in my transition, and maybe I like your word righteous, it has to do with that, is the coming down off of righteous. Because when I grew up in the struggle that I grew up in, when you grow up with an abusive dad, when you grow up with a mom who tells you she doesn't want to be a mom anymore and she drinks, and like if they like my mom's boyfriend after that was horrible to be with, and it was like trauma after trauma, like large T trauma, homelessness, stuff like that my whole life. One of the ways that I felt righteous, not even compared to my family, but was like, no, my life was hard. And it felt like people, especially when you see me now, especially like my husband's black. So everyone assumes my husband's life was hard and mine was easy. And he will be the first to say that could be not further from the truth, not further from the truth. And so I, for a long time, was like, I just need to be seen that I struggled. And I felt like if I was somebody watching this and I heard that the same things I need to work on were the same things that a wealthy person needed to work on, I would have been livid. And I was. Whenever anybody tried to say, I struggle with that too, I was like, fuck off. Your uncle did not do that. Fuck off. Your dad did not do that, right? And so do you see that? And if so, how do you help people like gain that perspective? Because for me, that was such a fragile place to be.
One of the first things that I look at is, are we talking about like big T trauma or small T trauma? Because we all have some trauma. And also, I'll say, as you do the work, big T trauma starts to feel smaller, right? And so how I support people is absolutely going to depend on where are you in processing that. If you're in the beginning stages and you're just trying to validate that this was not a human experience that should have happened, it makes sense that you were overwhelmed, that you couldn't process, that you maybe stored your memories wrong, that you continued in relationships where you ideally would not have continued to coexist. If you're still in those beginning stages, well, the work is going to be very, very different from somebody who is in what is now clearly a safe environment, fully believe that everything that happened to you, around you, with you, sometimes even for you, it's okay, that you don't need to blame yourself, you don't need to shame yourself, you don't need to guilt yourself, you don't need to do that to other people anymore, because you're not emotionally needing to place those feelings, right? Like having that understanding of where am I in this process and in this human experience is really important. So if you and I are talking right now, and I'm hesitant because I'm like, a lot of different people are listening, right? So if you and I are talking right now and you're telling me, I've processed most of it, you know, and I'm honestly not resentful anymore. I'm just sad. I think I'll always be a little sad that it happened. But I really do think it would serve me to know whether all people probably feel like their trauma is just as big. Then I'd look you in the eyes and I'd be like, yeah, Caleb, people probably do, because all we can do is compare to the parts of reality that we've come to learn about. Right. And so it probably feels just as big to them because it's a 10 out of 10 on their scale of how sad they've ever been, or how angry they've ever been, or how hurt they've ever been, how betrayed they've ever been. So they probably think it's similar because it feels that way based on their scales. That's okay. But if you're coming to me and you're like, Lena, I'm still really upset about this thing that my uncle did, or, my dad did, or whatever. Like the specific conversation, the specific person, the tension around it, how could I have behaved the way that I did?
Mm-hmm.
I'd be like, I really don't care what other people think. Like, you think what
Mm-hmm.
serves you, which is this pain is incredible. Like, not in a good
Mm-hmm.
way, but there is like,
Yeah.
no one can give it credibility or take away the credibility. It is just incredible. It is just
Mm-hmm.
like immeasurable what it is that I'm going through. And I don't care. I have no desire to figure out what anybody else's scale is and what experiences they've had, and I've decided this is the worst thing to have ever happened. Yeah, then that's also true.
Mm.
Then we validate that.
Honestly, I just feel like everyone needs to rewatch that part over and over and over if you've dealt with like this stuff. I feel like that was so beautiful and so powerful, and I really like the line. Like I'm not even like cold, but I just got goosebumps where you said, and it makes I can feel the pressure behind my eyes of the idea that no one can give it credibility. Like, because I think that's literally what it was about, was like getting credit for my suffering. And because why else do you suffer? And I think that's the hardest thing, is there's not a reason or a purpose or like fate or like any of those other things. And that's where I do think, I don't believe in toxic positivity, but I do believe if I were to try to be like, well, everything happens for a reason and da da da, I'm like, no, yes, I'm a great person who learned a lot and learned resilience and perseverance and perspective because of this, but there, I don't believe that it's like one of those things where you're like, yeah, just try to make a great flip of it. I'm like, no, it sucked. And that's the end of the story.
Yeah, well, and it's the middle of the story because you're evolving. And so it could be that a year from now you look back. I mean, I have a nice little list of things in life where if I look back, if they come up, if there's something that needs to be processed, something reminds me of something, there is a part of my brain in the executive function that's like, you know what? That made me who I am. That helps me help people. That gives me a sense
Mm-hmm.
of purpose now because I've processed it enough and I can find genuine gratitude and see how, in a way, it happened for the good of the world, that was
Mm-hmm.
so freaking hard. And at the same exact moment, another part of my brain is going, I won't even say it because there's a lot of expletives, right? But it's just
Yeah.
like swear word after swear word of like, screw that. That never should have happened. People should have protected me, like, and both are true at the same time.
And I think that's one of the things that I've learned the most. Two things can coexist.
Yeah.
And I think that that's the hardest part, is seeing that. And kind of, we talked about that already. Like the pendulum, we always want to swing and swing and swing. And I just feel like everything is a medium shade of gray, where it's like there's so much together. Or maybe it's more like multiple colors like bobbing around all over with each other versus like a blended shade of gray, because they're just there next to each other. And that's almost like I was saying before too, I would try to like erase it and then only leave one bobble, like the positive little yellow glowing bobble. So,
Wait, I
okay.
want to say something real quick. I think
Yeah.
this will resonate with you and anyone in your audience who, like you, like science a lot, which is I would just treat it like it's quantum physics, where you think the particle, like the atom exists here, but actually you realize it exists in multiple places at once.
Mm,
And so you're like, this is my identity. This is the amount of healing I've had. But actually, there's a part of me that's over here and it's so much more enlightened. There's a part of me that's over here that's like just swearing in the back of my head 24/7 about this, telling me to be hyper vigilant. And
that's so
yeah.
good. That's so good. I love that. That takes me down a whole other path too, of like, I think other conversations about like resentment and regret. And so when you think about that mom relationship, and if you could go back in time and give me, and you can choose your age, you could choose like me, teenage Kayla, and or Kayla who turned 26 and had that therapist tell her life was traumatic, like what would you tell me in those times if I was just discovering this, or I was just going through a lot more of it? Well, I'm never not through it, obviously. You could also give current me advice if you want, but pick an age, give me some instruction.
Well, I'm going to call myself out too, because my first instinct is to want to go to childhood you and be like, hey, this is not okay.
Mm-hmm.
That is my first instinct. I don't know that that's the best thing to do. I wouldn't mess with the time space continuum like that.
Yeah.
But there's that instinct there of like, oh, maybe if I could be the person to have given it credibility, that feeling that something is off, that feeling that maybe I deserve better somehow, like maybe there's a different reality that would serve me more, and maybe it's okay for me to not be happy with the current circumstances and whatever dialogue. Like, of course, there's a part of me that wants to go there and be like, Kayla, this sucks. Like, this feels horrible. Almost anybody in this situation would feel really bad. And I want better for you. And I like that I would want to brainstorm and, protect and provide a better plan. And that's there. I don't know if that would serve you. And the fact that you didn't process it like logically to be traumatic until someone told you later in life may have meant that wouldn't have served you.
I kind of think so, actually. I think that that was a time where ignorance literally was saving my life, literally saving my life.
Yeah.
And that's wild to think about, where it's like that coping mechanism was strong. So when like people like complain about coping mechanisms, I'm like, nah, they literally help you cope. That's what they're there for. Like, you need them. Do you need them like too long? No, but you do need them in like my experience for myself. So yeah, okay. Okay, keep
Yeah.
going. I like that. I like that thought.
So if the time that you became aware, you said was 26, right? I would go back to her and I would say, I know it really, really, really is the most annoying thing to hear right now, but I want you to remember this is mostly about your internal processing and getting in touch with your power to love and validate yourself before you go work on those relationships. And I would sit down with you and I would figure out what are the things you need to communicate to create the safety so you can do the internal work, because those are different boundaries. But I would say, in terms of like the aspirations of one day my mom and I are going to get manicures together, I would have said this is not the time to aspire. This is the time, based on what you've shared with me, this is the time to set the boundaries you need for safety, to feel respected so that your nervous system is okay to handle whatever is going on around you. Figure out what space you need, figure out what intimacy you need so you're not too lonely. Create that in the different relationships in your life, and then in the back of your head, hunker down and figure out like what is the internal part that I'm doing now. And then, I wasn't there to see it, but there'd be a different point in time where you would have done the internal work. And then I would have said, okay, well, now's the part where we have to assume that nobody can mind read, nobody has the same values you do. And so if you want better relationships, we have to take full accountability to make that happen.
My eyes just got so wet. I was like, dang, if I would have heard that when all of that happened, life would be so different. And I think that it would have alleviated a lot of pain that I had at that time with the realization. And that realization also spurred me, because I was married before my current husband, and it made me realize, what am I doing in this marriage? I'm in this marriage for all the wrong reasons. We don't even love each other. I gotta go. Like, so my life just, it totally changed. And then I met John very soon after. And then John was the first person in my entire life to show me, in my mind, where I could accept it, love. And that changed everything for me with relationship with him. And I think still there was a lot of that work that I didn't do with my family, and I did just try to jump back into. So I was like, I have John. I just want, now I can have a family. Now I can have this. Now I feel love. And it's like, I think we did one Christmas right after that with my mom. But like, other than that, when I tried to take him to meet my mom, we drove 2 hours to see her, and she just like didn't show up. And I was like, oh, that's not different. This isn't different now. Just because I have this does not mean that I could have that hope of manicures and things like that. And I was like, oh, yes, I still need to do all of that work. And then I think also the thing that you said was the boundaries to keep me safe. Those are things that I only started employing like 2 or 3 years ago. And I'm far from 26.
Yeah, ironically, many people who do that work start with what they think is the easier boundary to set, and so they go for more like the intimacy and dealing with the little things versus the actual, yeah, but am I going to feel safe and respected?
Yeah. Or I guess it was, I have to give myself more credit than that. It wasn't 2 years ago. It was definitely more than that time because I've lived in New York for a year now. So it's probably been like 5 years. So just because I think there were some things with some of my family and John being black that were like physical safety things. But so that did happen sooner than that for some of my family members. But that's another family member and another conversation for another time. This has been like so eye-opening for me, and we've already been talking for an hour, so I feel like we need to wrap this up. But I know that people listening to this who have experiences like this, I know this probably didn't even feel long to them at all because it didn't feel long to me sitting here. But I feel like we've gone over so much between boundaries, the validation for self, the like mining your feelings, compassion, all of these other things. But if we were to have somebody walking away from this, what would be the messages? And I could be the message that you've already given past me basically, but like what would you want to leave people with people who are struggling with their relationship with their mom and or grew up in unstable childhood, so therefore their relationship with their parents is very skewed? What is a message you would like to leave them with?
First thing I would say is that it's okay that your relationship with your mom so strongly impacts your relationship with yourself. Because I think many of us feel like they should be isolated somehow. And we see this trend that is being reported a lot now of people just disengaging with parents. And, that's becoming a solution. And part of the reason that the extremes on both sides of clinging to the parent and being very far from the parent happen is because sometimes it's hard to just sit there and go, wow, okay, I'm an adult, but this person still holds so much power over the types of emotions and reactions and responses that I experience in my body, in my nervous system, in my mind, in my identity. And I don't want that. So that's the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say is it's also okay to let it take up a significant amount of brain space accordingly. Because I think that, oh, you were about to say something.
That again would have been great. Again, it felt like such a problem to be, and like there would just be nights where I'm like, I just need to cry and I just need someone to hold me, but I felt so bad to even be upset for longer than like 5 minutes. And there's stuff that we'd have like things that would be drawn out, events that would be happening for like 8 hours, and then I'd allow myself like 10 minutes to be upset and be like, I cannot, this is already drawn out too long. And so that permission feels huge to me.
Yeah, in this society that we live in and the technological reality that we live in, there's always so much to do, so many opportunities for distraction, so many aspirations, so many people to compare ourselves to in real life and on social media that almost never portray any of this. But this is such a fundamental human experience. I actually don't know that this underlying assumption we have that you should grow up with a parent who parented you really well so that you never have to reflect back on it and figure out how to remedy the parts of personality that may have been changed for this person, and that that's the ideal. I don't think that this baseline assumption that we have as a society is accurate. What if this is really part of the human experience, like pooping? Like
But honestly, like if I think about myself as a teacher, literally how we learn is through adversity and problems. And like that's why we set up science was my big thing. We'd set up a thing and be like, figure out this problem, solve this. And that's how you would learn. So honestly, that makes sense. This could be the purpose of the human experience.
yeah, absolutely. And of course, I would still say the ideal is to have both, is to have a parent who makes the effort to figure out who you are and tries to give you the support that you need, and then messes up the appropriate amount so that you
Yes.
still have to figure some of it out on your own and learn a little bit of independence. But you know what? That's not an easy balance for a lot of people and for whatever reasons. And we can choose to forgive them, but still require them to behave differently. There's nuance there. But I think just cutting ourselves slack and going, you know what? I mean, how much time I spent on the toilet is not a distinction of how good the food tasted coming in. And, like sometimes things don't line up in life, and that's okay. Like maybe there were good and bad things. Maybe there was a mix. Maybe some parts were for a reason and some parts were useless. Regardless, I'm going to choose to have, whatever amount of gratitude I need to for my mental health, and then whatever amount of discernment that I need to for my self care.
I love that. Okay, so then do you have a third thing, or were those your two things?
I think the third thing is, the advice I gave you before is just figure out exactly where you are. Are you in the I just have to get through the resentment and righteousness part in enough to be okay sitting with my anger and sadness and more genuine feelings? Are you, I don't even have the resentment yet because I'm still wondering if it was okay that I was treated that way because it just feels so familiar. Are you all the way to, you know what, I'm sitting with genuine sadness and anger, and I just really want to work on how I communicate it though, because things are not changing as quickly as I'd like them to. And like, screw that. That's frustrating. So also just like giving yourself the nurturing that it takes to figure out where you are with the very many different things, and then give yourself the space and support accordingly.
I love that. Okay, this is just the last curious question that popped up into my mind then, because one of the things that you said is you're like, it's a trend to know, or for a trend for people to be like, nope, no talking. So, one of the things that was hard for me and is hard for me, and I'm currently in this with my sister, but deciding when do you go, or what do they say? They say go no contact is how you say it now. I was like, I don't know, we just are going to stop having a relationship. That's what I would say in the past. But do you have any advice for choosing that? Because there might be people listening right now where it is in their best interest for that to happen. And there might be people who are like, and they're trying to create something where maybe if they did go no contact, it would help them. Or they are doing that and maybe it's actually not being helpful. Like, is there a way to tell?
Well, this is my unpopular opinion that hopefully whomever is listening, you realize by now I have a lot of empathy for you. But the tough love is ideally you go, I'm going no contact for as long as it actually serves me and doesn't get in the way of my growth as a human being.
I love that.
So I think it comes down to making the distinction of when is this a pattern of avoidance that's a coping mechanism? When is this giving myself the space because I understand that I care and feel so connected to this person that I do need the space to understand my own feelings and to process my own thoughts and get to a place of internal clarity first. Like, this is very nuanced. I do think that this whole no contact forever would ideally only be in like tremendously extreme cases, and maybe not even then, but who am I to contact to make that comparison or like tell people whether to contact people, because I don't know what every person's gone through, so I only have my own lens. But I think what I've seen is I've seen a lot of clients go with no contact forever is the only answer, and I think that that is actually really diminishing your self-awareness of your own power to change the reality around you, because you actually don't need cooperation from the other person for you to be able to change the relationship.
Wow, I bet people just went, excuse me. That okay, we're definitely doing another episode. And what I think is so powerful about that you said though is, again, it's more like vague and not specific, and that seems to be a trend. Pendulum swinging, black and white, all or nothing. And I think for me, that's why the feeling of going no contact, I was like, I feel like I need that so bad right now, but I also feel like I can't do it because I can't say never ever, because I had that hope. And so I think being able to say, I'm going to go no contact until it no longer serves me. And I was the exact opposite. Like, I wanted to do it, but I felt forced to have to choose forever or not at all. And I was like, you could take like a break. Yeah. Like, that never occurred to me. Not once.
Well, it doesn't occur for a couple of reasons. And oh my gosh, this episode's so long. So
I
like
know.
we could go
It's
on.
okay.
It goes for a couple of reasons. The first is, again, we just don't see that role modeling. So usually we see taking a break as being for like very specific minor things, not because I actually need to evolve as a person, figure out my boundaries, figure out what makes me feel safe, seen, heard,
Yeah, it's called
respected,
a midlife
loved.
crisis when you do it. Nobody wants that.
Yeah, there's a lot of different names and a lot of different times we see it, and almost never really in a positive light or in a healthy way.
Hmm.
So that's piece one. But the other piece is it's actually a really convenient trap that our brain puts us in of like, but this is the person you love so much, and if you went no contact, you would lose them. So you have to stay into exploring what is familiar and like stay in your comfort zone and maybe don't actually set those boundaries because what if it leads to no contact? Like the brain has a really beautiful way of keeping us in what's familiar, and this is just one of the ways that it shows up.
This was so good and this was so helpful. And I'm so excited for the world to have this. And I'm so excited for you to come back and talk about the other relationships in my life. And then that last little bit that you said about the other person doesn't need to participate. And we'll get into that one in another one that we do together for sure. Thank you so much, Lena. This was so super powerful. I'm thankful for your brain and your willingness to come and share this.
Thank you, Kayla. That's really sweet. And I had a blast, and I can't wait for us to do this again.
Yay. Okay. Well, the typical, where can everybody find you?
I have my Instagram, which is at Lena S. Athena. I also have a new TikTok. They can check me out there too. But lenaathena.com is going to have a comprehensive list of ways to get in touch with me.
Yay. Okay. Thank you again so much.
Thank you, Kayla.